National Arts has been made possible by Low Real Estate Group at Path Realty, proudly serving the Shepherdstown community in West Virginia for nearly a half century, providing commercial, leasing, rental, marketing, and consulting. Hi, I'm Mike Baker, and welcome to National Arts. Did you know that West Virginia, and Maryland boast some of the finest artists in the country? One such artist lives in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. His name, Bruce Fransen. Award-winning musician, sculptor, and arborist, Bruce's delicate and wonderfully creative wood sculptures all begin with a log and chainsaw. So come on. Let's visit Studio 105 in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, where Bruce has a permanent collection on display. And then a little later on, we'll take a sojourn to his studio in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, where once a month, he invites people to stop by, just like us. Bruce, sculptor, musician, and arborist. They're disparate, but in your life, they blend well, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. What came first?
First came the music.
Okay.
Definitely. When I was about 5, I found my father's old metal clarinet in the closet, and he showed me where to put my fingers, and my parents, bless them, put up with my squeaking and squawking for years and years. And I just had a natural enjoyment for it. And my father was musical as well as my grandmother and some other members of the family. So I had a good kind of a foundation for moving ahead with it.
You don't use exotic woods. You use the natural woods that exist in our environment here. And I think that's pretty noteworthy, that you don't basically waste wood, but you use wood that is essentially on its last legs, no pun intended, and then you create something and basically let it blossom again.
That's true. I feel like there are plenty of treasures right here. We don't have to go to Brazil or to India or Africa and import things. And, obviously, there are some spectacular woods there, but there are some wonderful treasures to find right around here. Over here I have a number of box elder specimens that I may get to before they rot, I hope. I certainly have a bunch of walnut, and walnut holds up quite well in the weather. Unfortunately, I don't have a big storage facility that keeps it dry, so it has to stay outside. This is all walnut. This is walnut, some more right here. And continuing down, we are still seeing more and more walnut. I love walnut, it's a gorgeous wood.
Yeah. VCU had an influence on you, didn't it?
It definitely did, yes.
Yeah, I mean, how profound an influence?
Well, it was an explosive time. I was there from 65 through 69. And there was a revolution going on,
yeah,
a social revolution, and it was very mind-opening, I would say.
And then also, your music profession is somewhat improvisational because you do like jazz, you play some jazz, and pretty much the work that you do with wood is improvisational as well. It's sort of sinewy, lyric, ever-changing.
That's true. The medium demands it to an extent. I imagine there are some sculptors that start with a pristine piece of wood that is kiln dried and not going to crack, and they pretty much know what it's going to do. It may be a wood that doesn't have a lot of figure in it or irregularities. I love the irregularities, and the wood that I use is anything but pristine. Yes.
So when you use the term carve, not turn, what does that actually mean?
Well, let me first explain turning. A turner uses a lathe which spins a piece of wood and then uses a tool on the lathe to carve away parts of it. What I do is I start with a block of wood, and it's called reduction carving, and I carve away that which I don't want. I start with chainsaw, and then I move to grinders and sanders.
When you see, say, an old log or something that can be a product of your creation, do you see the actual finished work in it, or do you not know what the finished work is until you get into the wood?
That really depends.
Okay.
I think earlier on I really had less of a clue as to what it was going to be, except that I dabbled mostly in vessel forms, sculptural in nature, but vessel forms. So I knew it was probably going to be something that could contain something, which I enjoy that idea. If it was going to be a vessel with its own pedestal, I knew that basically, but I often took the approach of making a plunge, seeing what that looked like, and then reacting to the plunge. So it was improvisational in many ways.
You talk about working with the grain, and it's important for these particular pieces to be somewhat tactile. And I don't know if you're trying to describe a smoothness, a roughness, to somehow embellish the work. Can you explain that part of the process?
Yes, at this point, most of my work is highly polished. The finish is very polished and smooth to the touch, almost glass-like in feel. And I think that works well with my attempt to have elegant curves and lines in my work. There's something about feeling it as you move along it. And often at some of the shows that I've done, my wife and I put out a sign on our tables or our display that says, "Touching is mandatory."
Because you do a little bit of the work. When you're touching them, you polish them essentially, or
Yes.
you at least refine them somewhat. The oils in the hands, I guess they can somewhat embellish the wood.
Well, that's true, yes. Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
No,
Let's put it that way.
Well, you obviously don't want something that just displays. You want something you can pick up and hold and kind of cherish.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A given work, as I look around the gallery, and we'll take specific looks at some of the pieces, it looks like endless hours go into these.
I would say that's absolutely true. Some of them, I guess some of the longer pieces that I have worked on have taken, as much as 4 or 5 months. Some of them actually have taken longer than that. Of course, when I come off of a long project like that, I often, just as kind of a relaxing endeavor, I usually do some small work and some quicker work because I want to see something produced quickly after a long slog.
I have to read this because I want to ask you about this, and I want to see if this is just a microcosm of something bigger in life and in nature. You say, as you begin making a particular piece, you can not only sense the wood strengths, but its beauty. Is this a metaphor for a human form and how one shapes a personality, do you think?
That's an interesting question.
The more hands-on that we give things, and your father was so hands-on. I mean, not only did he introduce you to the woods, he introduced you to music, he introduced you to swimming. He sounds like a prototypical perfect dad.
Well, actually, my parents designed and built their house.
Oh, there you go.
On weekends and vacations. We lived in Richmond Hill, Queens, and the house was in Centerport, New York, a significant travel away. And I was involved in that as a 3-year-old. So I think the hands-on thing is critically important for the development of any person.
The more time you put in it, the more hands-on, the more valuable the piece, the more, I guess, personality it has, much like a human being.
I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think the more that a person involves themselves in a hands-on way with whatever the endeavor is, the more that person grows and the more their product grows with them.
Yeah. Congratulations on the 2017 Governor's Award. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, in West Virginia, the Department of Arts, Culture, and History, that's a mouthful, has a biennial show, and they award several Governor's Award every other year. And I was fortunate to be one of 3 people that year to win the top award. And that's a purchase award. The museum in Charleston buys the piece from the artist, and now it's a part of the permanent collection. Well, this piece is a member of a series that I do called Shell Forms, and this is, to break it down further, I have a number of pieces that I am now calling monumental shell forms because they are upright and somewhat monumental in appearance and size. This is also a maple piece, as the other one, but from a different tree and with a different kind of figure. Some people would call this ambrosia maple because of some of these patterns that you may see, these sort of discolored streaks, which are caused by an insect called the ambrosia beetle, and the tree reacts to that by compartmentalizing it, walling it off chemically, and then that area discolors. I often think of these upright shell pieces as somewhat human in form. They kind of read as a figure, and often as a dancer. And I think of ballerinas. I think of this perhaps being the ballerina walking on stage with her costume flowing. And on this piece, I got very involved with texture and color difference. There's a finish put on this piece, an oil varnish finish, which darkens the wood. The bottom is the natural color of the log. And then I left it rough. It's a rough textural feel, and I drilled numerous holes in here to give that feeling of sand and sea-like structures. This is another wall-hung piece, and it's part of a color series that I've been involved in. I'm getting very excited about color. My house at home is awash with wood tones, as you can imagine. So I kind of wanted to get away from that. I wanted some punctuation, and I felt that color was the way to go. One other notable thing about this piece is it's ash, and right now there is an abundant supply, but it's going to be gone very soon. The ash trees are all being killed by the emerald ash borer, and we won't have them anymore. So I'm trying to take advantage of what's left and, in a sense, produce a commemoration of the ash tree, a celebration of the ash tree. And it takes color very nicely. It's a very light colored wood. The grain shows through and the color becomes somewhat iridescent. This is where I apply my aniline dyes to the wood pieces that I color. And the aniline dyes are just various colors that come in these packets, a blue, a yellow, a red, and you can mix them with water, and I just use these old olive jars to do so, and then you take a brush and you paint it on. It takes a lot of layers to get a good strong color, and then after I do that, previous to my painting them on, the piece has been polished to a point of 600 grit
sandpaper and then buffed. Then when I paint the aniline dye on, it raises the grain slightly, but not enough to be serious. So then after I dye it to the point that I think is proper, then I buff it again, and it has a very smooth buffed feeling to it. Finally, what I do is lacquer it on top of that, and that really brings the color out. This is our in-home gallery space, which I'll give a plug. It's available by appointment, so give a call and come on by. I think what originally got me started with beginning to color some of the pieces was our home was filling up with a sea of wood tones. And while I love natural wood tones, it just became too much, and I thought there needed to be some punctuation. So these are some of my later pieces that you can see. I think I've developed a little bit more skill in terms of how they're produced. Interestingly enough, all of my later pieces are on ash. These color pieces are, as I said, on ash. And you can see some interesting striping in the grain, especially on the larger piece. It adds an iridescent quality. It refracts the light in interesting ways. Plus the very significant grain adds to the bullseye effect on the small piece. Well, this is an English walnut piece. It's part of the New Growth series, which is characterized by a lot of ornate edges and a feeling of lifting up and growing. And some pieces and some experiences are about my growth as well, my new growth. But English walnut is quite unique in that it has very dark contrasting lines in the grain and makes it quite beautiful. The white edge, the creamy white edge, is essentially the sapwood that you see around the edge of a log end if you cut a log. And so I've left that to create this decorative edge and act kind of like a frame. This is from the main branching point of a corkscrew willow tree. And because of all of the crotches branching off, you get this incredible flame grain, both inside and out and throughout. Because it reminds me of sort of celestial things, the name of this piece is Universal Truth. The large piece is made of box elder. It's part of my pedestal vessel series, so I just call it box elder pedestal. Some box elder has an incredible red stain, which is a reaction to insects or other problematic things for the tree, and it produces a red stain. If left in the sunlight, the stain is made of phenols and other volatile chemicals. It will fade and turn brown. Originally, some of these patterns in here were brilliant red. Unfortunately, it's been in the sunlight and it has turned brown. This walnut piece is one of my monumental shell form series. They're upright and obviously enlarged shell forms that are representative of what a person might find strolling along the beach. I just love the spiral forms, and it's just a wonderful endeavor. I want to say exercise, but it's way more than an exercise. Trying to get the curves and the spirals and the multiple complex spirals to work. It was a very complex piece to produce. very difficult and time consuming. This piece took about 3.5 months, and I worked almost every day of that 3.5 months, an average of, I'd say, 5 to 6 hours a day. This is a table made from an extraordinary maple burl, and you can see the incredible grain that just fans out almost like fire from the center of the piece. And it's mounted on walnut legs. You can see some of the bark edge that I left on burl all the way around. I like natural features, and I carved the edges to get this kind of scalloping effect. This is an English walnut piece, part of my Nature Form series, and that series involves keeping some of the natural forms. This is where a branch would have come out, and the same over here, and there was another branch that went through here. So you get a very interesting twisting of the grain. Once again, the great feature about English walnut are the very black aspects of the grain against the smoky browns. This is one of my color series, and this is also ash. This piece has particularly vibrant grain in this area. I have the green diffusing out from a yellow center into a purple rim, and finally the orange on the outside. I really enjoy trying to blend these colors one into another and layer them for a maximum effect. This is a red stain, which is natural in some box elder. Sometimes you get just the pure white. This is also box elder. But the tree reacts to troubled areas, problem areas, and tries to compartmentalize. You can see this wall that it's built, and then it produces this red stain. This is an interactive piece. This is an earlier piece of mine, and it has many components, and the idea here is that people should play with their art. You can pick things up and hold them, you can rearrange it, you can have fun with it. Why should the artist have all the fun? This is just a conglomeration of pieces of wood that I did not want out in the elements, and some pieces that I have begun and obviously not finished. And a kind of a pile of inspiration, essentially. I walk by this constantly and start thinking, what am I going to do with this piece? What am I going to do with that piece? And eventually I will do something with some of this. This is a beautiful piece of walnut. It's a crotch area. You can see the many limbs that were growing out of this area, and in between you get this incredible mixture of grain. This is another slice of the same walnut as the other table, and with a different kind of finish. This is an oil finish, that was a lacquer finish, and a different support system. This is a leg system that I'm trying to work with. I use these plastic bread trays that you might see in stores, and I put car mats over it so as not to scratch the work that I'm working on. And I use a variety of tools. I do a lot with a 5-inch disc on a drill, and sometimes I'll use a drum sander, and sometimes I will use carbide burrs, and I use angle grinders with carbide burr wheels, and I use angle grinders with chainsaw wheels. And there's a very interesting tool. It's a long-nosed belt sander, and it's adjustable this way for comfort and getting into places. It's good for getting into places that you need to work on that are tight. And also die grinders with carbide burrs. So that's oh, there's one more. This is an arborist tool. It's a carving tool. I don't use it that often, but occasionally it's good. It's got carbide teeth on this wheel. And that's pretty much the extent of it. And I have various attachments and buffers and so on.
Let's touch on your music career before I let you go today.
Sure.
Music career has been quite profitable as well. I would imagine it's hard to balance all three things at one time, but you have found a way to make it part of your life.
Well, yes, I have forced a way to make it part of my life. I guess I spent a lot of time playing music all the way through elementary and high school band. And I had a good friend, and when I was in college in Richmond, he was in the Army, stationed at nearby, south of Richmond at Fort Lee. And he was a brilliant keyboard player. I first met him as an accordion player in 7th or 8th grade, I can't remember now. And he had just moved out from Brooklyn. And at the time, he was so far in advance of other people at that age musically. So I had the good fortune of having him encourage me and playing with him. And then again, he shared an apartment with me when I was in college, and he was in the Army, and furthered my musical adventures and pushed me because he was really something.
Thank you for joining us on National Arts. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.